We are on 12.0, it's called Methods. This is page 96. We're still not going to get all the way to page 157, but page 96. There's a few bits of this that are really important. So if you have a bit of energy left before we take a break, let's do this, okay? Key principle up there, I say methods should be chosen to achieve desired outcomes, which are your learning goals. And my little box there is really important. If I could put it in flashing red lights or something, I'd put it in flashing red lights just to say that it's important. Maybe when the video version of this is produced, we could have flashing red lights here. Goals, as I've been talking about it today, have been these questions about outcomes and results of what kind of transformation people want. So to think into those, begin to name those, begin to flesh those out, right? Assessment has been, how are you going to know that people actually are learning? What indicators are there going to be? How are you going to measure that? Right? So if you want people to become the kind of doctor that's in that flower diagram of being a doctor, how are you going to assess whether they're gaining those skills, capacities, knowledge, and so on and so forth, right? My point here now is the content of each of those areas that you are aspiring to have knowledge and skill in needs to be mapped out. Okay? You need to say, here's the knowledge that people need to have. And in these notes, I'm just cutting to the chase and saying, I'm not going to deal a lot with that. There's a whole bunch of things to say about that. It's content of particular kinds. But you're going to have content because fundamental knowledge is going to be key to the whole learning that Fink is talking about as significant learning. A medical expert is at the heart of this medical thing that illustrates from the flower, etc. There's going to be content. Don't think that this is not without content. I'm emphasizing process more than content, but that's just assuming for the sake of argument and the amount of time we have, there's going to be content. It's going to be different if you're talking about engineering, baking a cake, doing medicine, teaching theology, whatever it is, okay? What I want to move toward is method, all right? And thinking about method from a learning standpoint. All right, so this is what these questions under item B are about. Here's the kind of logical progression that I am suggesting to you. Who are the learners, just by way of where this conversation has been? Who are you as a teacher? Right, you're following along, page 96. What's the setting, thinking about where we are? What is the topic? What is the content? What's the subject matter? Are we talking about cakes? Are we talking about pancreatic cancer? Are we talking about the doctrine of the Trinity? Whatever. And then what are your goals? Right? And so here we are at 5. This is the goal sort of section that draws on Fink. Right? How are you assessing? And in light of all of that, what is your method? Okay? So conclusion number 1, on page 97, this is my little conclusion. Methods should be chosen because they're best geared to generate learning, rather than being chosen due to the teacher's general habit, peer pressure, convenience, laziness, tradition, etc. Chosen for the sake of learning of these learners in this situation, in this context, with these goals in mind, right? Knowing that we're going to figure out whether they've learned it or not through some particular kinds of ways, right? Then method comes into play. The reason I say that is typically we jump to content and method before we thought about a lot of the rest of that. Often we think about content and method, content more than method, and then we wonder, oh, who was it that I'm teaching again? And then you back people into the content that you've previously decided on other grounds that you want them to cover. That's not the right way to do it, is what I'm arguing, right? Why don't we actually start with who are the learners? Who am I as a teacher? Where are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What is this going to look like? What kind of outcomes do we want to have? What kind of content are we dealing with? Right? Is this cakes, cardiology, or what's another word that starts with C? Catechesis. That's a good sounding Greek theological word. Then you think about your your method, your approach. How am I going to do this? How am I going to teach this? Okay? We would avoid a lot of mischief if we didn't. Now, the nasty part of my little quote there, that's kind of a dig, is at teachers, and I am one myself, who just get into habits and who get into a sort of comfort zone. This is the way I like to do things. This is how I always do stuff. And I've basically got a hammer, and therefore the world looks like a nail. And this relates to what I was arguing earlier. Diversity of learners means you need a diversity of learning approaches. And whole person, keeping whole person in mind, if you're interested not just in the cognitive, and there's various ways to being interested in the cognitive, but you're interested in values, dispositions, habits, practices, application, and relevance to the outside world, then you're going to need a different kind of approach. You're going to need lots of different kinds of methods. You're going to have to do different kinds of things. Right? So that's about goals. If you have a holistic, all-encompassing kind of set of goals, you're going to need more than one way to get at those, I can assure you. Right? The more complex and the more whole person your goals are, the more complex and whole person your methods have to be. Okay? Very simple at some levels, but actually if we did some of these things, we'd be better off, is my argument. Right? Conclusion number 2, there are more methods available than you think. We did an exercise when I taught this class last semester with my class of 20 students, and we started going around. I have the sort of horseshoe design I was telling you I used. We went around 3 times, adding a new method to the conversation. Our little class brainstorming exercise came up with 60 different ways of teaching. And we could do the same thing and probably more because we have more people here. Okay? So if you always just do the same thing the same way all the time, no matter what, then stop for a minute, pause, and ask, how many other ways are there to do this? And if you can't think of anybody, ask somebody else. Say, can you think of some other ways that I could do this? There's always more ways to do it, right? Not for the sake of novelty, not for the sake of distraction, not for the sake of entertainment, but for the sake of lots of ways to get at stuff. And the point earlier, that's a Gardner point for multiple intelligences, is if you really want it to take deeper root, teach it from more than one angle, teach it in more than one way, teach it in light of more than one kind of intelligence. That's getting at more of the whole person. Whether that's corporate training, whether that's discipleship stuff in the church. Same principle applies. Right? We are who we are as human beings. That's the way that we're wired. Right? If it engages more of us through more and different ways, it goes deeper into us, we see more of its relevance, we're able to do more with it on the other end. That's what I'm on about.